My wife, in turn, humbly follows my example. She sits down, and holds my hand in the diamond mudra. The sacred smoke hits my face hard, and everyone is waiting for a spectacle. The group remains in respectful expectation, sitting near us. As has become customary in these cases, I think nothing, I neither hope nor don't hope. But a powerful peace is tempered second by second, with more force in my being. Butterflies immediately appear everywhere, perhaps around 50. One black gold butterfly particularly catches my attention. Saturn is golden on the inside. This is its secret color. People express their anxiety and their incomprehensible joy. There are those who doubt, asking themselves if it wasn't we ourselves who carried all those butterflies. Americo Living Trail, 385. Suddenly, something wonderful happens for those who know elementary symbolism. A butterfly lands on my wife's head, but no one seems to take this into account, perhaps because it happened so quickly, in an almost secret way. And then, the butterfly majestically lands on top of my head. This moves me beyond words. I realize that a sacred symbol is being fulfilled, and at that very moment, my inner voice tells me clearly, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. The butterfly flies away, and then returns to rest on my head for several seconds. They continue like this. I feel higher powers are directing them, with the consent of the spirits of the butterflies themselves. Considering it's time, I squat down in meditation, so that the incense, and I become one. Like someone baptized with sacred smoke. Aquarius. Sister Rihanna sits in front of me, perhaps trying to enter into communion with me, and then respectfully invites the entire group to join in a circle and say aloud, 3 times, Teotihuacan. Everyone seems to be done with the matter, but I feel the time is ripe for something more, and I remain still. Sitting down, I close my eyes, and say the Om loudly, 3 times. I realize that the top of the pyramid may have already been opened, but at this precise moment, its light thickens incredibly. I could almost touch it like the most powerful steel. It takes shape and strength, and to the rhythm of my desire, the entire pyramid encompasses the entire planet. It's a powerful sensation, and as I say Om, the butterfly lands on my head and stays there. I clearly perceive that invisible masters of light are making this possible, and are in control. I think it's like the white dove on Christ's head. I open my eyes, and discover a small white butterfly fluttering all over the top of the pyramid, and among the people. The others in the group also occasionally get butterflies, but I never saw one land on their heads. Rihanna extends one of her hands, palm up, and right before my eyes, the large butterfly lands there. Rihanna and I lock eyes. I'm amazed and say, may the power be to serve the masters and your brothers. Of course I know. But thanks for reminding me. I understand that this symbol has been presented before my eyes to recognize something. Guardian of Teotihuacan for the order. Well, my wife and I are guarding it from Ecatepec, just half an hour from Teotihuacan. Americo Living Trail, 386. On this trip, the following is fulfilled. I will be among you and you will not know me, because I will be a man among men. When I'm with my companion, already on the way back to the citadel, the small white butterfly is everywhere, surrounding us as if it were saying goodbye. That same day, while we were eating, one of the sisters told us about her experience when she climbed the Pyramid of the Moon and saw, like in a movie, wars and blood on the first level, and many young girls on the second level. Some of us believe that, rather than referring to the sister's past lives, she actually read the pyramid. I tell you that, if so, we were not allowed, or possible to protect those at the base of the pyramid, only from the first level, because it was here where I did close the circle. We've seen a request from those who have at least a basic understanding of life itself, I stated. That same afternoon, the group headed toward the Zocalo to deliver La Circular number 15 to both the general public and fellow Mexicans who used to settle around here. This is what I decided to do, along with a symbol for the zodiac sign Leo, whose key is dare or act. This is how the Leo portion of the Aquarius cross was covered. The rest of the leaflets, 33, were almost all distributed at the top of the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan. Fourth Pilgrimage, Oaxaca and Monte Alban. Saturday 24th and Sunday 25th July 1999. On the way to the northern bus station, my companion and I crossed the Sciences Passageway, at the underground junction with the La Raza metro station. Right here, we hit across the Los Constellations Square Americo Living Trail, 387. The trip to Oaxaca begins in Mexico City, specifically at the Northern Bus Station, at midnight on Saturday. The time the truck departs for Oaxaca, we're 7 people, 4 women and 3 men. This is my entire army. 2 of them, in particular, have overcome severe emotional hardships in their relationships. One of the men is in a delicate process of internal confusion. In short, various things happened, like a kind of test, before leaving for Oaxaca. Days before, my wife had lost a prescription for disability at her workplace, and she explained to me that this wasn't just any incident, as many people had been fired for this reason. However, I didn't notice she was afraid. She was ready to face the situation. I told her about her fate and the possibilities of it coming true or not. All of this was to gauge her mood, and what I convinced myself was that she wasn't afraid of losing her job. This filled me with joy. Fortunately, the next day, the recipe book appeared. Such extreme things happened to everyone, every single one of those who went to Oaxaca. And in the order, you can't reason, or explain what has no explanation. You exist at the very moment of the emergency, or you don't exist at all. I, who was at the helm of its young history, was the one who learned the most from all this. The truck arrived in Oaxaca. We had spent the night on the truck, and we were all kind of dozing. It was just getting light, and I told them we should head toward Mitla. But I didn't really know if it was far or close. We asked and were told we had to board a bus, which passed about 10 blocks from the station where the bus that brought us from Mexico City arrived. We took our austere suitcases, and, all sleepy, we headed there. And there we waited for about 20 minutes, and finally our ride appeared. On the way to Mitla, we heard the radio announcer talking about the sign of Taurus, interpreting it as, "You shouldn't idealize too much. Because Taurus must be practical or else deal with the tangible." This reminded me that this was the Taurus zone, in the Aquarius cross, that we were incarnating. I think a brief explanation is necessary, as to why we're landing specifically in Mitla. So, I'll tell you about it. Americo Living Trail, 388. We're going to Mitla, because it's the feminine form of this place. Then we'll go to Monte Alban, which is the masculine form, to transfer it to Mitla and complete the connection. A little over an hour passed, and the driver informed us we were in Mitla. We hurriedly got out, and found ourselves just on the edge of the small town. We shouldered our backpacks and headed deeper, on a mission to find a place to stay. We walked through several streets populated by these friendly people, and about 3 blocks from the archaeological zone, we found the best hotel in the area, which wasn't exactly a luxurious. Its name was Hotel La Zapoteca. We were all smiling and playing around, until the owner of the place appeared, and gave us prices that seemed fair. So now we argued about which rooms we preferred. After which, we each settled in. An hour later, we met again, with the expectant goal of discovering where the archaeological site was. While my wife and I were still packing our bags, I had the feeling that everything I was doing, as was the case with this trip, was a fool's errand. Even more so, because I was involving a group of people who believed in me. Then, without waiting, an inner voice sternly called my attention. "You are on sacred ground, and what you are accomplishing is very lofty, so stay at peace." This calmed my mind, and gave me back my confidence, but the human part of me was still there, held back by all the magic that was driving me. Finally, all the brothers gathered at the hotel entrance, and then headed deeper into the town of Mitla, heading for the archaeological site. We were approaching some ruined shacks, where we began to breathe the air of antiquity, when a Zapotec guide approached us. At first, I treated him with suspicion, but I was willing to accept whatever the divinity offered us. He was a local native, not well versed in the intellectual aspects of these ruins, but possessing practical and direct knowledge, that came to him from his grandparents. He is such a simple and humble person, that he quickly wins our sympathy. In the king's palace, we discover the Aquarius cross, saber, boardroom, cooler, dining room, dare, reception room, and caller, king's bedroom. Then in the citadel of the resurrection, there are two tombs, that of the king and that of the priest. In the center of it, we discovered the energy quadrant, where the ceremonies were performed, and there we stood, as if to feed ourselves with this special force. At one point, we perform a small ritual with Don Bonifacio, the guide, in which we acknowledge him as the guardian of Zapotec culture, in the name of the sacred initiatory tradition and the great universal fraternity. All of us, or almost all of us, close the energetic circuit, and I have the privilege of being able to extend our love to him, touching his heart directly. Americo Living Trail, 389. 389. In the Square of Sacrifices, most of us were able to make contact with the exact place where the virgins, it is said, offered their hearts. And on the Aquarius cross within the King's Palace, 4 of us, a couple and my wife, with me, stand in each of the 4 arms of the cross, my brother in Leo, and his partner in Scorpio, my wife in Taurus, because the entire area is Taurus, and I in Aquarius, because we are entering this age. In the center of the cross, we mentally light our hearts in place, turning from side to side in a spiral, always holding hands. After we left the archaeological zone, we invited Don Bonifacio to eat and he accepted, typical of Taurus, food, to complete pacts. But first, he wants to take us to the ruins of the ancient Zapotec Observatory. That homeland is so dear to him, and one that a person with his rural character would find difficult to part with. It's like a secret, which he decided to share with us at one point, as something very special on his part. It was a place practically unknown to most people, as it lies outside the archaeological zone, and only the locals know of its existence. We passed by the shacks of the townspeople whom he greeted warmly, and then we reached a small hill, almost in the middle of the town, and just behind the hotel, where we were staying. We were on this mound for about an hour, and Don Bonifacio let us rest. Don Bonifacio began to tell me that he used to play here as a child, and that there were tunnels beneath the mound, where we were standing, and that he liked to go inside and explore them, like Boy Scouts. Suddenly, the women began to realize that, almost physically, a triple flame heart, blue, yellow, pink, began to form in the evening sky. Prana at the Mitla Observatory, but also the setting sun shining, and the clouds at both ends had gathered, forming a heart. On the sides, blue and pink shone, and then where the sun shone directly, a marvelous golden hue appeared. This is the triple flame of the heart ignited at Mitla for the new age. For my part, I imagine more than 20 energy tubes concentrated in this place, in particular contact with specific celestial bodies. All this in a space no larger than 50 square meters. We head towards the market, and Don Bonifacio passes by his house and points it out to me. It catches my attention that he lives on Cuauhtemoc Street, number 13. While we're eating at the market, someone asks me if we'll rest at the hotel, and it occurs to me that we should go to Monte Alban. It was around 3:20 p.m. I ask Don Bonifacio about it, and he explains that they close at 5 p.m. He suggests we go to the Tule Tree, the thickest tree in the world. I think I hear him explain to me that it's the most powerful. And he tells us the legend. Americo Living Trail, 390. 390. There was once a king who belonged to a people of Mike's blood, the only one not conquered by the Spanish. The king carried his staff and set out to reach the Mixtecs, Monte Alban, and Zapotecs, Mitla, to guide them toward peace and happiness. So he stops at Thule and leaves his cane stuck there. There is where the Tule tree grows, which is said to be 50 metros 2,000 years old, and has a diameter of 2,000 years. I remember that Los Teniches, in Mexico City, according to what Velasco Pana writes, Regina, found in the Chapultepec forest, the Ahuhuit called El Sargento, which is the invisible entrance door for the Aztecs' pilgrimage to Tenochtitlan. Could the Ahuhuit of Tule be an invisible gateway to the sacred centers of Monte Alban and Mitla? I decided it would be good to go towards him. I told Don Bonifacio that before we said goodbye, I wanted to give him a gift, and he humbly accepted. I asked him to come to our hotel, so I could give it to him. We were already in our room, number 4. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, he began talking to me about Christ and the end of the world. He said, "Wherever two or more gather there is Christ." And it is said that there will be terrible illnesses and pain in those times. While he speaks, he dedicated a book, Leni Christical, to her, as a recognition of her love for the Zapotec tradition. My wife also signs it, and so, our friend Bonifacio leaves happy. It seems to me that the Thule tree is the gateway to the sacred centers of the world, and to the root of all human history, as long as the immovable, immemorial elder recognizes us as chosen. So that afternoon, after eating, we headed towards the Thule tree, Tula, central sun, and on the way my wife looked at the sky again, and the triple flame heart was still there. As we stood before the imposing tree, the first thing that occurred to me was to suggest the group walk around it several times, elevating their minds. As we did so, and I explained that we were on the third walk, the ancient Thule tree spoke to me telepathically, saying, "You are the savior of humanity, the master of the world. You may enter this invisible door as many times as you wish." This left me quite impressed, because a tree had never spoken to me before. Americo Living Trail, 391. 391. I couldn't believe how I was going to explain this to my students without upsetting them too much. At that moment, a rain began to fall, like a gentle, sweet breeze, a very pleasant thing, that wasn't trying to wet us, but rather energize us. Some local indigenous people, including children around 15 years old, explained that the Thule tree safeguards the history of humanity, and that many animal species can be clearly distinguished in its shapes. We finished the tour, and headed to the church, which is located within the same area, very close to the sacred tree. As I walked toward the pews in front of the sanctuary or atrium, where the priest usually stands while celebrating Mass, a strong smell began to overpower the incense, becoming increasingly penetrating. It must have been strange forces. I think of the biblical apocalypse, which explains that it is the forces of light that win. Then, that inner unease disappears, and silence falls. We walked through the local square, and what they sell most there are small cups of pomegranate seeds. This reminds me of the Greek myth of Persephone, who, for eating a pomegranate seed, was condemned to remain captive for 6 months in the underworld, and free for only 6 months on the surface world. In some ways, the Thule tree has its roots in the center of the world, Tula. From there comes the infinite light of God. Thus, this underworld, when all human time-space is transcended, becomes the superworld. Food has been transmuted into the mana of the gods. We returned to Mitla, and it was beginning to get dark. Upon arriving at the hotel, we decided to meditate on the mount that Don Bonifacio had shown us. We stood on the small observatory, and a profound peace filled the air. It was related to Mitla, the ascended priestess protecting the entire valley. The next day, at a good time, we left for Oaxaca, heading for Monte Alban. When we were at the bus station in Oaxaca, one of the brothers was uncomfortable with the situation he was experiencing with one of the members of the group. He also seemed disturbed by what the group was doing, and because of this situation, he informed me that he had to go to another state in the country to visit a relative. At the moment, I'm surprised by his attitude, but on the other hand, it was to be expected, given his apathy, since we boarded the truck in Mexico. So I have no choice but to let him go. The small group begins to form, and while some sisters go to make copies of the pamphlet we plan to distribute in Monte Alban, others of us begin to stroll around the area. Then, at a magazine stand, I find one that deals with Nostradamus's prophecies for July 1999. I comment on it, and on the importance of our mission at this moment. Americo Living Trail, 392. 392. Shortly after, we found the transport that would take us to Monte Alban. It's an archaeological site located high up in the mountains. When we arrived, we didn't find anyone we could honor as a guardian of Monte Alban or anything like that. And, on the other hand, the tour guides around here looked more like market vendors than real guides. They were nothing like Don Bonifacio, but rather like those anthropologists who despised him, and who, when we were in Mitla, spoke ill of him, considering him somewhat crazy. There was a moment of weakness within me. I felt ignorant about the subject, and didn't know what to do. My students became concerned and tried to encourage me, telling me that wasn't the important thing. Given the situation, I gathered the few brothers who formed the group, and tried to encourage them to remain alert, trusting in God. Next to the entrance is the ball court temple. My wife explains that for the ancients, the ball game was a ritual to represent the macrocosm and microcosm. It's like a drama or an oracle, since the outcome of the game meant what the people had to do. Thus, the players represented the planets, and if, for example, the planet Mars won, that was the outcome to follow. We decided to walk around this temple, but were surprised to almost stumble upon a stone covered in symbols at the beginning of this route, among which was clearly visible the cross with 4 equal arms, what we call the Aquarius or Maltese cross. It had a circle in the center and an even smaller one inside the circle, like the symbol of a sun. I kneel and take out my cross, placing it in contact with this one. I humbly ask permission for what must be accomplished in this place, to be fulfilled through me. Permission is granted. Everyone accompanying me also begins to bow, and then kneel with the reverence. We walk again until we close the circle around the Balcourt temple, and I once again make contact with the stone. Someone who doesn't belong to the group asks me why I do that, and I explain that in the beginning all cultures were one, which is why we all have the same cross around our necks, that is on the stone. Then 2 women approached with their Christian crosses, which they began to show me with concern. I pointed out that one of them was holding a chalice in the center, above a cup as a reminder of the Holy Grail, the cup where Jesus Christ drank the wine, while the other woman was holding the cross with an image of the Virgin Mary in the center. They asked me for permission to also make contact with the stone, and I give it to them. One of the brothers in the group suggested giving a pamphlet to the man who asked first, and we gave it to him. My wife told me, America Living Trail, 393. We were looking for the guardian, but realized that you are the guardian and we don't need the supposed guardian. Monte Alban means place of gods and men. We head toward the main plain, and discover the command pyramid in the center of the citadel with monuments. We exchange a few comments, then head toward the central pyramid. We circle it, and when we find ourselves at the foot, behind it, one of my students gets very restless, trying to figure out what we are going to do. I tell him that someone like Leo is needed to cover the back of this pyramid. We're going to try to do a ritual and everyone has to go up to their respective places to meet us up at the top. Of course, this is prohibited, as the only permitted way is to climb from the front. But the student, the only male disciple present, offers to do what I suggest. Given his unconditional willingness at this very special moment, I clarify. According to the initiatory tradition, this can only be done by someone who is the first disciple of the master. But he insists on trying. As far as I know, the job should be done by men, but since there are only women left, I think they should be warriors of peace, so they can take on such a delicate role. Each of the women discreetly goes to the side ends, and begins the climb. I head toward the front to ascend there, since that's where I belong, along with my wife. One of the sisters catches up with me as we were about to climb and says, "It is not possible to pass through the place where I was supposed to go, because there is a very deep pit that prevents passage." This sister covered this path without completing it. Then, she took my wife's hand, closing our energetic circuit with the diamond mudra, and I told the sister to stand on the left side. I offered my hand naturally, without a mudra, affirming, "Come on sister, you come up with me." I bow reverently to the steps, along with my wife in an attitude of humility, and we begin the ascent. Later, once we were at the top, my students, mostly women, were somewhat agitated, and told me that the security guards there were very worried, looking for some gringos to reprimand for doing strange things. According to them, 4 gringos were trying to climb the pyramid through the forbidden areas. I don't know how they came up with such confusing, but very accurate, ideas about what we America Living Trail, 394, were actually trying to do. The fact is, they hurried past us in their search, and didn't even bother us. So we continued our ritual. We were already at the top of the pyramid, and gathered at the place where there are 4 stone mounds, like the bases of a column, that hasn't been installed, so we can sit on them. Each of us sits in our own column, and in the center of the 4, we pass, one by one, to offer ourselves to the Aquarius cross toward the 4 cardinal points. In the name of my mighty presence, I take my food, Taurus, and make it my own. Then, I take courage, Leo, transformation, Scorpio, and knowing, Aquarius. Just a few meters above this square, is a throne-like place that occurs to me to call the king's place. But I didn't sit there, leading the ceremony, but participated just like everyone else. I had planned for us to do hatha yoga at this location, but in the course of events I forgot. In any case, during the process of the surrender to the Aquarius cross, as our brothers and sisters and I moved to the center of the quadrangle, my wife looks up at the sky, and says to us with emotion and surprise, "Look at the sky." Just above our heads, at the zenith, the sun is surrounded by a beautiful, well-defined, perfectly circular rainbow. We are all distraught. One of the sisters can't resist, and begins to cry with joy. The divine sign was too obvious to be considered a coincidence. Hours later we heard on the radio that this atmospheric phenomenon was being discussed. At that precise moment, I sense an energy beginning to expand uncontrollably throughout the Monte Alban Valley, and I dare to think it's spreading outward to the world, but I prefer to remain silent. This is just a hunch. We descended from this pyramid, aware that the group's objective had been achieved, and now resolved to do something for the sisters, who have painfully lost their relationship. Walking around the area, we located the ruins of a propitious room, just across the road from the ancient astronomical observatory. There, invoking the masters, I dedicated myself to disconnecting from my sister's chakras any undesirable ties to their former relationships. We leave this great sacred temple, and my wife and I get a little nervous, so as we get into the taxi, we start arguing. The brothers get upset, because they have nothing to do with this situation, since everything is supposed to be harmonious. But without them even realizing it, my wife and I are already on the other side of this strange barrier and manage to control ourselves. The taxi driver had witnessed this. Americo Living Trail, 395. Discomfort between us, and begins to smile, trying to calm things down, saying that we must maintain peace. We are all happy again, and we go to eat at the main market in Oaxaca City. It's an exquisite and abundant meal, something unforgettable. As we walk through the same market, one of the sisters buys me a special drink from this place, and I tell her this is part of a pact. She looks at me in surprise, but she knows that, for some reason, this is how it must be. We return to Mitla. Our exit tickets force us to hurry, but we still take advantage of the opportunity to visit the site of the town of Mitla before reaching the ruins we visited yesterday. Then, we climb to the upper part, where the Zapotecs of the pre-conquest era would set up watch to avoid being surprised by enemies. They call it El Calvario, the Calvary. We are about to go up, and I say to my brothers, "Here it is not, take up your cross and follow me, but leave your cross and follow me." Before climbing the stairs leading to this strange sanctuary, they humbly allow me to touch their foreheads. Then they begin the climb. We found this place really dirty. I regret this, because the Virgin and Christ depicted there have expressions of pain and anger, not like angels, but like ordinary humans. One of the women comes up next to me, and says with spontaneous emotion, "Master, last night I dreamed that the place or temple was dirty, and I was trying to clean it by sweeping." "I'm sure it was this place," I replied. The women perform a brief ritual, forming the moving infinity sign, intertwined and multiple, around the 3 cement crosses inside this sad, completely neglected room. Meanwhile, my brother and I remain at the door, as if on guard, and at the end, we are the two who offer a prayer to Christ, for the sake of the new age. We went down from there, and while we all headed toward the outskirts of the town, with our backpacks on our shoulders, our brother agreed to go and deposit our united hair at the Mitla Observatory, as a symbol of the living antenna of the unified group in contact with the cosmos. We boarded a taxi headed to the bus station in Oaxaca. As soon as we got in, my companion noticed a very peculiar decoration on the windshield, just hanging from the rear-view mirror. It was a multicolored circle that I thought represented the 7 rays, and in the center, clearly, the seal of Jesus, JHS, then below it, the dove of the Holy Spirit, and further down, a 5-petaled flower. Americo Living Trail, 396. Although I didn't like the inverted position of that flower, I didn't consider it malevolent, given the overall setting of this decoration. Rather, like the pyramid of the moon in Teotihuacan, I only understood it to mean that we don't reach the souls hopelessly asleep, but only those who seek and find. And this driver was going to give us a very special communion, sharing several truths little known to tourists in general. It seemed to me like a passing grade on our trip through Oaxaca. The driver is very friendly and showy, in a really good way, so he begins to tell us that, just as in Mexico we have the sleeping woman covered in ice, they have the sleeping woman of the sun. He explains that she is located further along the road we have to travel. 5 minutes later, he shows her clearly outlined on a large mountain, that at that moment, was being caressed by the last rays of sunset. It really did look like a sleeping woman in the shape of the mountain. I ask him if the people in the village are aware of this, and he begins to tell us that the women of that village go there to bring him their offering, so they can have children. Also, when we asked him about Mitla and Monte Alban, he said there's a tunnel that runs from the ruins of Mitla to Monte Alban. But it's sealed, and not allowed to be visited by tourists. At that moment I remember, that when we were heading to Monte Alban I told my students, ancient ruins are not ruins, but cities are ruins, although they do not seem so, and the so-called archaeological ruins are the real city. With this tunnel thing, which the taxi driver told us, I wanted to understand, that the connection between Mitla and Monte Alban was a secret mission carried out by our group, and successfully. I was also struck by his story, according to which at the end of the Mitla Valley, in the last village, there is a mountain that ends in a peak, and at its summit, is a large spherical stone with a mark like a navel. This stone doesn't move, no matter how hard you try, and the only way to move it is, if you touch its navel with your finger. At this point, it occurred to me to say, jokingly, that with this, one can no longer have the power to touch the navel of all women. We all laughed heartily, but the taxi driver became serious and added, it is the navel of Mitla. I realized that in some way it was about touching without touching, which moves the great human mass. Americo Living Trail, 397, 397. And if Tenochtitlan is the navel of the world, well, Mitla also has its woman sun and her living and magical navel, her solar plexus of sublime and spiritual emotions, to give birth to the new race that liberates the Zapotec people and the world. When we got out of the taxi, the least we could do for our Zapotec taxi driver was to give him our usual gifts, basically the book and our brochures. Fifth Pilgrimage from Chapultepec Forest to the Zocalo, July 28, 1999. Background: I decided to hold the ceremony before dawn, and at the suggestion my wife had given me weeks before, I understood that it was not best to place the cross on Sister Angelica during the ceremony, but to do so, when we were in Chapultepec Forest. In a way, it would be like offering one's sister to Popocatépetl, but not in the brutal way that semi-degenerate peoples offered their virgins and prisoners to sacred cenotes, so that the gods would have mercy on those people or grant them favors, but in the sublime and spiritual way permitted by the New Age. For this pilgrimage responds to the activation of Popocatépetl. In any case, the surrender of a single, virgin woman as a state of consciousness was real as energy, not as form. It had been over a month since one morning upon awakening I had captured the image of the young Angelica, dressed in the white meditation robe, that the sister who had brought her into our group, was preparing for her. But in this vision, I perceived her with the special distinction of having her mantle edged with gold. It was during this vision, that I heard from someone who seemed to be the very essence of the sister, her fifth dimension, I have come to this backward planet to serve humanity. No one explained it to me, but as I have expressed, I thought that it really came from a beloved planet, the ruler of Aquarius. Americo Living Trail, 398, 398. That is why I decided, that her mantle would be ivory white, typical of the white flame, and that it would bear the symbol of Uranus visible, above the moon, because according to the Tibetan, the esoteric planet, that surpasses the moon is Uranus, recognizing her as the priestess of Urania. Sister Angelica had lost her silver cross, and all her dreams were shattered when her relationship with her beloved boyfriend unexpectedly collapsed. All of this was a sign to me, that it was time to give her the copper cross. Interestingly, once I suggested, that Angelica be given a cloak, just as I perceived in my vision, I learned that she had recently dreamed, that she came from Uranus, and was very shaken by the strange experience. Another issue related to this one concerns my brother and his wife, who had recently moved to the Cuauhtémoc neighborhood, without my or anyone else's directing them to do so. They lived just 2 blocks from the Glorita del Angel. When they did, They asked me to perform a cleansing of their new house, to bless it, and apply the sacred fire, or whatever white magic was necessary. The case wouldn't have attracted much attention, if it weren't for the fact that he would soon be making this important pilgrimage to help Mexico. But around that time, I was reading that Cuauhtémoc used the body of Pachita, the famous Mexican shaman, to heal bodies and souls. Then I read Regina as a reincarnation of Cuauhtémoc. That seemed very curious to me, considering that the Glorita del Angel corresponds to the Navel of Mexico. And it's all in the Cuauhtémoc neighborhood. July 28th was approaching, and I dreamed of the Mexican people of the time before the conquest, dressed in the Indian fashion of that time, living surrounded by pyramids. These dreams couldn't be a coincidence, because they became increasingly persistent. And once, when I was thinking about how I could help the world through Mexico, a voice that claimed to be Cuauhtémoc spoke to me telepathically and said, "In your eagerness to save the world, you save Mexico." And I answered him, "And you, in your desire to save Mexico, save the world." A few days before the date, my wife and I took a reconnaissance tour of Chapultepec Park on public transport, along the Sparta Reforma Americo Living Trail, 399. From the forest to the Solo. July 28, 1999. Chronicle. Minutes before leaving for Chapultepec Park, to begin the honoring of Sister Angelica, and en route with the presence of the few attendees, on the morning of July 28, 1999, I said to those present, "Events are taking place that, despite being simple, are nevertheless part of a cosmic plan. First of all, let's consider that the Sublime Elder Brother, SHM, dies on July 22nd, and is born on July 28th, that is, he dies first, and is then born. That's why July 22nd to 28th is the week of the SHM's resurrection. This is the reason why we went to Teotihuacan, the beginning of the sign of Leo, on July 22nd. With this march from the forest to the Zocalo, which is a march of silence, though not literally, but of contact with God, it so happens that I know of the succession of the Sublime Elder Brother who is reborn, because it harnesses the energy of the eclipse of August 11th, prophesied by many wise men. So I'm not your master, but only your older brother. Cosmic contact is also provoked by this day's walk, as Sister Angelica is placed with her order's cross. And earthly contact, as I transcend all personal feelings to understand that I must place silver crosses on my biological brother and his wife, right before the Angel of Independence monument, which is the solar plexus of Mexico City. Sister Angelica will help me, as she is Angelica, and the event will be at El Angel, fulfilling the androgyny of Uranus. Just as, in turn, my wife helped me place her cross on Angelica in Chapultepec Park, considering her my complement. Again, the androgyny of Uranus. I do this without any personal interest in family, but only in fulfillment of the symbol, where, as far as I've been able to understand, celestial and biological genealogy go hand in hand. Although I don't know how or why all this happens, the only thing I understand is that this allows, in some way, to redeem the Mexican people. This march complements what was done with Tepeyac-Tlatelolco Zocalo, which is the female natty. The forest Zocalo march activates the male natty. Once again we find the masculine and feminine. After this explanation, the small group left the place. We arrived at the monument to the boy heroes Banas de Moctezuma. We remembered the crucial role of the battle waged by these boy heroes on September 13, 1848, and then the silent march on September 13, 1968. Americo Living Trail 400. A few days earlier, when I had done the exploratory tour with my wife, we discovered that this entire road was very dirty, both externally and internally. Throughout its history, Chapultepec has withstood many attacks of corruption and illicit activity, both on the part of its people and its governments. So when we arrived with a small group, we knew where to walk. The uhui tree called El Sargento is located behind Chapultepec Castle. But now, stubbed and damaged, it is protected by a small fence. Once there, I asked Angelica to kneel, so I could place the cross on her, which had already been blessed in the name of the Christ of the New Age, during that morning's ceremony. I invited my wife to participate in the ceremony. The sergeant greets me saying, "Boy, I was waiting for you." I was confused because, if this tree called Sargento was already dying, what would happen to the energy of this important place? And he answered me, "We always wait for beings like you to come, so that the transfer of the door to another young and strong tree entity can then be accomplished." She granted me permission to enter. Seeing the sister kneeling as close as possible to the battered, but alive ahuhuit tree, I felt the ritual of offering the heart of a young unmarried virgin, a virgin by state of consciousness, to special entities and events being repeated. In this case, to Popocatépetl. It was a simple act. Afterward, we began our walk toward the Anthropology Museum. We arrived at Reforma Avenue, bordering Chapultepec Lake. We crossed the Gran Reforma Avenue, and stopped in front of the Tlaloc god of water. It's a gigantic stone in the shape of this god, and is located next to the museum. At this fountain, we took a little water with our hands, and placed it on our heads. We then walked along Reforma Avenue to the Angel Monument. My brother and his wife were waiting for us, and after brief greetings, my wife and Angelica consecrated, before the censer or sacred fire at the base of the monument's column, the crosses that would be placed on the brothers. Afterwards, I asked them to kneel to conclude the ceremony, placing their silver crosses on them. It caught my attention that my disciple was also named after my brother, perhaps because this reaffirmed the relationship I had discovered between Uranus and the personal, related to this pilgrimage. I handed them Circular 15, and asked them to leave since we still had things to do. They looked at us with concern, but they obeyed. Americo Living Trail 401. The women in my group were excited and wanted me to explain a little about the symbols on this monument, as I had told them that, as far as I knew, it was designed by Masons. I wanted to explain things to them, but I was interfered with by my lower self, and in my eagerness to teach them, in this sense, I hoped they would see that I knew everything. So my feelings weren't pure, and the wisdom didn't flow properly. It was an embarrassing moment, and I had to keep quiet. They were still restless, and went to investigate what was behind the door at the entrance to the great obelisk, behind the cauldron. There was a tombstone inside, at the base of the great column, recognizing a foreigner who gave his life for the liberation of Mexico. I believe his name was Javier Mina. I found all this very interesting. For a moment, they left me alone, allowing me to inspect almost the entire monument and calm down, regaining my composure. When the sisters, including my wife, left the visit, I was more calm, and then I was able to speak. A circle, a square, and a hidden triangle. They are the typical symbols of magic moons. The lion of the sun is Leo, dominated by a child, that is, Aquarius, and the lion is entangled by a chain of garlands, that is, what it says, will come true, la Biblia. The boy will play with the lion. Furthermore, wild instincts are not mastered, but rather through self-mastery, Leo, and not outside of ourselves but within. Leo's individuality is congruent with Aquarius's group character. Then, we have the obelisk, which is the spine, and the angel at the top represents enlightenment. Hell, Gel, is one of the cries archaic humans used to communicate when they were learning to speak. This special cry was used to call upon God. Remember, Angel Angelica. We must also know that humans are not the descendants of apes, for humans, although backward in the past, have always been, and will always be human. According to Master Gurdjieff, apes were a decadent offspring of humans from times past. When women were isolated after terrible earthquakes, they cohabited with animals. The Mesoamericans also mention this fact in one of their sons. Lao Tzu says that a true emperor doesn't need fame, worship, or recognition. All he needs is simplicity, and making the people feel that it is the people themselves who spontaneously find what is right. He also teaches that the people don't need intellectual knowledge, as that complicates everything. What the people require is simplicity. Those who complicate the law of justice wage war, and their peace is false. True law and justice consist of being the law itself, embodying it, finding balance within oneself. Americo Living Trail 402. So that the war is within us, until we achieve true peace, also within us. This is what the four goddesses around the obelisk represent. As he spoke, I realized that he was relating the four elements, life and the zodiac. 1. Aries impulse fire peace. 2. Taurus resources earth law. 3. Gemini relationships air justice. 4. Cancer obstacles water war. 5. Leo impulse fire peace. etc., until the entire zodiac is completed. Then, as the angel monument represents the solar plexus of Mexico City, the obelisk is referred to as the umbilical cord of Angelica and her womb. It is in her womb that the advancement of the new race, of the new age, takes place. As children of men who are the children of God. I finished speaking, and we continued our walk. We arrived at the entrance to the Hidalgo metro station, greeted the Virgin, and then began our walk along the Avenida Juarez and 5 de Mayo, to the Zocalo and the Cathedral of Mexico City. The first thing we did in the great Zocalo Square, Plaza de la Constitucion, was to mark the great arcanum, the two intertwined serpents, throughout the square. Then, we asked permission to enter. It seemed to me that the door was very obvious. Because at the end of the cathedral, right where the Zocalo Plaza ends, there is a place marked with a legend. It is the site where the Stone of the Sun was discovered. Each of us in the group stopped at this legend and invoked Huitzilopochtli loudly. After passing through this invisible door, we began to advance in a straight line toward the flagpole. We calculated the location of each of the 7 symbolic chakras along this line, and at each one we stopped to decree, "I'm the violet triangle of the Caribbean, of the New Jerusalem." Mexico. By the way, I had a new copper cross engraved for me, as the old one was defective. I also took advantage of the morning ceremony to bless it, and I put it on while we were in the car on the way to Chapultepec Park, as I didn't want to attract too much attention. While I was putting it on, I heard inside, "Americo Living Trail 403, 403. Now you are the guru of the world, the guru of the new age." Anyway, we entered the cathedral through the main door, and walked through the left wing to where there was a huge Bible. I thought we'd try opening it, and the first chapter of the prophet Jeremiah came out, "The ruin of the nations." And then, the last chapter of Isaiah, "New heavens, new tenderness. The New Jerusalem adored by the nations." It was evident that it was about the judgment of the nations at the beginning of the New Age. We had tried to enter the underground section where the niches that house the remains of famous figures are located. The idea was to find the stone Regina touched. But we were unable to enter, it was under repair. Introduction to knowledge of Mexican culture. By then, I had already reviewed some historical background, including the Sunstone and Huitzilopochtli, as well as general knowledge of the ancestors of the Mexicans, such as Quetzalcoatl, the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, and so on. All of this would be invaluable to me on our pilgrimage to Mérida, and then on our return to Cotepec, Veracruz. Regarding Mexican culture, 3 books caught my attention, especially the last one, The Cult of the Stars Among the Mexicas by Iolatl González Torres, The Celestial Science of the Aztecs by Hannibal Goslar, The Universe of Quetzalcoatl by Lorette Segure. My mind was activating over this basic information, which would definitely be very useful. I wasn't going to become an expert on these profound topics in a few days, but I needed to know what ground I was treading. Mapidreo of the Sun. What is the calendar or sunstone, really? This is the most important stone graphic monument left to us from pre-Hispanic antiquity, and despite numerous studies, it has not been sufficiently deciphered. Americo Living Trail 404, 404. It was found in what is now the Zocalo at our capital, on December 17, 1970, when leveling was being carried out for new paving, about 35 north of the Department of DF. It is carved from a single piece of olivine basalt rock, sourced from the southern quarries of the Valley of Mexico. It weighs about 25 tons, and its diameter is 3.58 meters, although the knowledge it entails comes from various native cultures, possibly including the Toltec. Its origin is most certainly Aztec, and it must have been crafted in the 15th century, during the time of Azotl, 1486 to 1502. Right parenthesis. 5 sons. The Aztecs held the idea that the current era had been preceded by other ages, imperfect creations that, as such, had been destroyed, always in search of perfection. These different stages had been 4, called suns, which having succeeded one another, had given rise to the 5th, or 5th sun, in which the Aztecs lived at the time of the conquest, this last stage also susceptible to destruction. 52-year cycles. Since each sun or cosmogonic age had a different duration, but always enclosed a complete number number of 52-year cycles, which has come to be known as an Aztec century. At the end of each of these periods, a new end of the world was feared. Therefore, on the last day of each century, that is, of each 52-year period, the priests anxiously observed the sky. And upon discovering that the Pleiades were passing over the zenith, they jubilantly announced the will of the gods, who had granted a new cycle of life. This concession was repaid with sacrifices to the sun, the supreme deity, in which appear, in symbolic form, we repeat, hearts and blood, the favorite food of Tanadia, the Navajo name of the sun god. Right in the center of the gigantic monolith appears the face of Tanadia, the sun, from which derives its name, sunstone. The sun sticks out its tongue, a symbol of light. On the sides of the face can be seen the claws, representative of the eagle with which the solar deity is also identified, imprisoning human hearts. Both the face and the claws are covered with representations of jade, the precious stone of the gods. Some believe that each of the suns surrounding Thanadia's face represents true stages of cosmic evolution, symbolically reminiscent of the evolution of the earth. Others believe that they are merely symbolic forms of timekeeping, in which the suns are purely chronological periods. Americo Living Trail 405. The tiger sun. The symbol of the first stage, Sun Tiger -4, is represented by a tiger's head, ocelotl, and the number 4, which means that the protective god of this stage was Tezcatlipoca, represented by his symbol the smoking mirror, is supposed to have lasted 676 years. In it lived the giants, who did not till the land. They ate wild fruits and roots, and lived in caves, until they were attacked and devoured by jaguars. The son of air. The symbol of the second cosmogonic age, Sun 4 Wind, is Quetzalcoatl, a versatile god who can take on different personalities. In the figure that represents him, he appears with a head from which a duck-shaped mouth protrudes, with which he blows the winds, and devastates the fields before the harvest. It lasted 364 years, ending on the day 4 at Hecatl, wind, as a result of terrible hurricanes and earthquakes, that forced the gods to turn men into monkeys, perhaps so they could defend themselves. The son of rain. As a symbol of this third stage, known as Sun 4 Rain, appears the head of the god Tlaloc, who is related to the cardinal point south, from where the ancient Mexicans supposed fire came. It lasted 312 years, and ended like its predecessors, on a day 4. On this occasion, the 4-Quetzalcoatl rain, from which we can deduce that the calamity that devastated the Aztec people was a rain, but of fire. The few men who did not perish were those who the gods transformed into birds, and who, flying, were able to save themselves from the lava flows. The son of water. The fourth cosmogonic age, Sun 4 Water, is represented by a vessel filled with water, which serves as a frame for the head of the goddess Chalchiatlicue, wife of Tlaloc, patron of the waters, and also of this era. To survive the cataclysm that occurred in this stage, which lasted 676 years, men had to become fish, since, when the sky collapsed, a series of great floods occurred that destroyed everything. It ended on the day 4 water, reaping all that was life on the planet, to the point of being followed afterwards by a long period of silence and darkness, that the gods broke, only when they decided to create a new and definitive era, more perfected than the previous ones. Note that the duration of each cosmogonic era is divisible by 52 years, which make up the Aztec century. The fifth sun. Americo Living Trail 406. The fifth cosmogonic age, in which the Aztecs believed they lived at the time of the conquest, appears to have been insufficiently deciphered. There is a symbol, Alin, meaning movement, which, together with the numeral 4, forms the date on which the fifth sun should appear, due to a great movement or earthquake, which is also the meaning of Alin. The hieroglyph is formed by a conventional sign framing Thanadia's claws, and representations of the 4 previous suns. At the top, an inverted V shape suggests the appearance of an emerging ray of light, while at the bottom, a Chalchihuat earring appears. Wheel of Days. In the sunstone, continuing from the center to the outside, we find a circular strip divided into 20 equal squares, which limits the previously deciphered strip, corresponding to the cosmogonic suns. This other strip, called the Wheel of Days, is what probably gave rise to the name calendar for the sunstone, since it contains the glyphs that represent the 20 days of the Aztec month. which, multiplied by the 18 months that the Mexica year contained, give a figure of 360 days. The Mexicans believed that each dawn was the result of a battle that the Sun King waged against the moon and the stars, whom he had to defeat, in order to rise to the sky, in the form of an eagle, and bring light and warmth to humanity. At the top center of the monument, there is a calendar sign with the date 13 Acat read, which, according to Aztec mythology, corresponds to the birth date of the Sunday from it. On either side, two enormous turquoise serpents or fire serpents, known as the Zicotl, emerge. Their important role is to carry the sun as it travels across the sky. From the open jaws of the reptiles, at the bottom, emerge two human heads that represent the cardinal deities of the north and the south, invocations of the fire god Xiuhtecutli and the sun god himself, Tenochtitlan. This symbol of the Zicotl may have a broader meaning. In a certain sense it is related to Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, and it may also be one of the variants of Quetzalcoatl, in which case it means precious serpent, or turquoise serpent, that is, of something very valuable. The celestial science of the Aztecs. Hanro Goslar, La Cultura Mexican and its relationship with the stars. Americo Living Trail 407 Nanahuatzin and Tecusistecatl. After the terrible cataclysms that devastated the world, and imposed a long period of darkness, the gods became alarmed, because nothing and no one appeared to predict the rise of the future new sun. Under these conditions, Nanahuatzin and Tecusistecatl appeared, offering to resolve the situation. Both performed their ritual penance for 4 days, and finally threw themselves into a great bonfire, that had been burning for just as long. The first and most daring to throw himself into it was Nanahuatzin, a deity that means he who has sores or pustules. In the myth, he appears as poor, sick, wounded, afflicted, and powerless. However, upon contact with the fire, he was purified and sublime, becoming Tenochtitlan, or sun, the supreme deity. The other character in the myth, Tecusistecatl, is the god of fertility, and is credited with the snail, the figure sometimes used to represent his image. It took him longer to throw himself into the fire, although he eventually did so, becoming a deity of the moon, represented either as a woman or a man. This whole myth seems to occur in Teotihuacan under the character of the warriors called eagles and tigers who had so much relevance in Aztec life. Astros. The solar calendar was divided into 18 months of 20 days, which made 360 days, plus 5 days called Nimantimi, which were left over. The ritual calendar or Tanabahuali, the day count, consists of 260 days, which was a combination of series of 20 signs, which carried different names of objects and animals, and 13 numbers. In combination with the solar cycle, the Venusian cycle exerted a more direct influence on the fate of the individual, whether it attacked him personally, or the entire community. Everything seems to follow a cosmic order, from which, of course, man does not escape. Venus and Mercury. According to mythology, the stars embody a certain character. The deity is reincarnated in the star, so, for example, Quetzalcoatl is transformed into Venus. Americo Living Trail 408 Venus is the brightest star in the sky. It is a planet with an orbit internal to Earth, which means that at our latitudes, it rises or sets 3 hours before, or after the sun. For 236 days, it rises in the east as the morning star, then disappears for another 90 days, only to re-emerge in the west as the evening star for 250 days. It disappears once more for 12 days during its internal conjunction. The 260-day calendar was based on the appearance of the star. The hummingbird could be a bird associated with Venus, since it appears on the headdress of many of her representations. Quetzalcoatl means the feathered serpent, which doesn't mean that this god or Venus are associated with all snakes, but it certainly is with that type of serpent. The symbol of Sayacatl symbolizes Quetzalcoatl and Venus itself. Xolotl could correspond to Mercury. This would explain many of the characteristics shared by Quetzalcoatl and Venus. Both planets are interior, and, therefore, have a similar cycle and close relationship with the Sun. For this reason, many peoples of the world consider them a family. The Sun occupies the place of the father, Venus or the Moon, that of the mother, and Venus or Mercury, that of the Sun. The relationship between Sun Venus and Mercury Nanahuatl and Quetzalcoatl is emphasized by the deformity of the three deities. Xolotl was called the brother of Quetzalcoatl. Escalona Ramos also identifies Xolotl with Mercury, Xiv and Tlaloc with Mars, Jupiter with Tezcatlipoca, and Saturn with Ciuhtecutli. He bases his analysis on the color of the planets and mathematical calculations about their revolutions and cycles. It should be added that Jupiter, like Venus, is seen very close to the crescent or waning moon, about to be in conjunction. This would explain, among other things, the association of Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca with the night star, both in the chronicler's accounts, and in the codices. The moon. The personification of the moon is rarely invoked or worshipped. However, its aquatic and nocturnal attributes are shared by other gods, and by association, its symbolism gives name to deities with no apparent lunar connection,